welcome to Nelson Reimagined talk. I'm Andy Abbott, so I'm the associate artist on the Nelson on the This Is Nelson programme, which I think most of you that are here know about. But it's a £25 million investment into Nelson as part of the town deal funding, and between In-Situ and building bridges and super slowway, they've kind of carved out a chunk of that for culture and people and place, and within that overall kind of strand, we've got a micro strand called Nelson Reimagined. The idea with Nelson Reimagined is that it's thinking about what the future of a place like Nelson could be, what this investment might mean, and really what art and culture can do to kind of create a sustainable sort of legacy for this bit of funding, but also thinking what the different pathways for post-industrial towns might be. And so far that's kind of taken the form of a series of artist research commissions. So we're inviting artists to come and help us find out about all the interesting and good stuff that's going off in Nelson already, to build on that and think, well, what are the things that you could activate in the place that might sort of do this, create this sustainable future. So last year we had a series of artist commissions that identified different themes and areas of interest, things that happen in Nelson, which involved food, the kind of potential for the empty spaces or underused spaces in the town. There was things about the green and the blue spaces of Nelson, and obviously we're here today sort of in one of those, the nice little parks that you don't know about, and the canals. And we've taken some of that research and passed it on to another couple of artists that have been working with us this year. So we've got Rob St. John and Hua Young Young, who will sort of share about the projects that they've been working on since really around sort of January time, wasn't it, that you started on that. I've invited Gareth Brown from Leeds, who's involved in a collective called Red Plenty Games, and also the Leeds Surrealist group. And the kind of thing that I was thinking was connecting these three sort of areas is what role can play in a sort of artistic and creative way have in shaping or imagining different futures for places like Nelson. So we're going to be talking for about, I don't know, maybe like half an hour, 40 minutes, and then obviously we can have a little conversation with everyone that's here as well. So I might just start off, if it's all right, just by asking you to introduce yourselves, and what role play plays in your practice. So I'll start off with you, Rob, since you're furthest away.
Hi folks, I'm Rob. It's really nice to be here, see all your faces. So I've been working with Andy and the team for the last kind of 3 months or so on building a sound map of Nelson and surrounding area. So I think sound is a really good way of thinking about play. Like, sound recording can be as playful and as daft as you want it to be, or it can be as deep and as meaningful as you want it to be, and quite often switches between the two in quite a short space of time. So it's a perfect way of working with people to kind of think about what role listening plays, what happens where we live when we listen, maybe a little bit more closely, a little bit more attentively. So I've been taking groups out, I've been working with existing groups, but I've also been asking for submissions of people recording on their smartphones or whatever of sounds of everyday life in Nelson. They've been getting sent in, and we've been building an online sound map that anybody can navigate, listen to, share, and it's been listened to all over as far as we know. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Right, so thank you. Yeah, and Hua Young.
Hi, hello. I've been trying to build on the research from the previous year, and the call out was to imagine a community toy chest. And I thought, instead of making toys or a chest for people to borrow, what if I could make players? So you don't have to rely on a chest, because the skills are in the people. So I wanted to start up a first respond play unit for Nelson, which is like the volunteer fire service, but for play. So if there's a play emergency, this is who you would call. And I'm still in the recruitment process. So I feel like I want to get across the idea that playing is an essential skill, that it unlocks imagination, because when you're playing, you're temporarily in this magic circle that allows you to think about alternatives without consequences yet. The only consequences are in your mind. And with that, you can practice things before you test them out in the real world. And the collective nature of imagining together is what I think we need for the future. So I want to be serious about play, which seems like contradictory and oxymoronic. But that's what I think the role of play is. And you can have this around serious topics, which is how you approach them, so that you create a safer space to talk about that. And just for an example, I want to show you two games I've made previously about fairly serious, heavyweight subject matters. So this is a card game I made with young people at the International Slavery Museum about the legacies of the transatlantic slave trade. That's heavy stuff, but we tried to inject some lightheartedness into it so that you would be more open to thinking about things in a different way. Then I made this board game with young people who are not in mainstream education in Peterborough. It's called P-Town Bay, and if you know your video games, you will recognize the aesthetics from Grand Theft Auto. And this is because I worked with 15 and 14-year-old boys. I was trying to talk about the climate emergency, and they just want to talk about cars. So, but I was going with what they're interested with, because it's their future that I wanted to talk about, not mine. So that's what I want to do with Nelson. I want to find out what the people of Nelson think plays should be for. Like, who needs it? What kind of play is suitable for people here? And I don't know that because I'm not from here. So that's why I want more people. I'm on a recruitment drive.
Thanks, Faye. And Gaz, what's your practice and what role does play in it?
Sure. So I think I'm the one amongst us that has no direct connection to Nelson. So I'm very much a guest here, and very nice it is too. Hopefully it won't be my last visit. It is my first though. I've never been here before. So there are really two aspects of my practice, the things I do in my life that are relevant to this kind of talk about play and place. They're both quite separate in a way from one another, and they're both quite different. So the one thing, one is I'm a member of the Leeds Surrealist group. Now this was a group that formed 30 years ago this year. I've been involved 20 years this year. And this is, I won't necessarily assume any prior knowledge, and I also don't want to go on about it at length about sort of surrealist theory or whatever, but fundamentally this is an anti-capitalist movement that understands reality, the way that we engage with reality and place, as being completely subordinated to the accumulation of profit, but suggests that it's not possible to simply think your way out of that by thinking of other ways of organising. So what this leads to is this idea that you need to harness what surrealists call objective chance, which comes from Hegel originally, as a sort of agent that makes history and makes the world along with humans. So that leads automatically onto games, essentially. Like, how do you bring chance into the way that you engage with the world and the way that you perceive the world, such that there's this kind of differently socialized element to it? And that group actually started, before I got involved, it formed around a game called Explorations of Absence, which was a game based in the streets of Leeds, where they were looking at different spaces and kind of thinking around this idea of absence and what was missing from that space. What was there? Was there a kind of implication that something had been there that wasn't anymore? Was there something that should be there that wasn't there? They made objects that they left in different spaces for each other and things like this. More recently, we've had an extended game which we called Deserts in the City. That was an exploration of what we called neutral spaces. So there we were looking for parts of the city of Leeds where there had been a kind of redevelopment attempt that hadn't really worked, essentially. So particularly we played around this area of Leeds called Granary Wharf, which is where the Royal Armouries Museum is there, and in the 90s that had all been gentrified and built up, and they'd had this idea that it would be this huge kind of cultural hotspot and with expensive flats around it. And those things are still there. It's not a waste ground, but it is like a dead space. There's nobody walking around. There's nobody enjoying that space. A few places are empty. Nowhere is very exciting. So we wandered around that space looking for essentially like cracks, looking for points, places where another life had sort of seeped through, and we could places where we could find poetry and so on and so forth. And actually, interestingly, although the group itself takes a lot of different approaches to those explorations, my main thing is usually sound recording, so collecting sort of odd sound objects from those spaces. So that's one thing. The other thing is I'm involved in a collective called Red Plenty Games, which is just a little 3-person collective, and that's much more straightforwardly about designing kind of games with rules for people to play, but very specifically they are sort of mass participation political strategy games. The reason that we play them, the reason that we design them, is to help people within particular, not just within particular cities, often that's the case, but sometimes within particular organisations or at events or whatever, think through what they have in their city and how they can use those things to transform those cities. And again, it's explicitly a kind of anti-capitalist thing, and the idea is to give people the opportunity to think through who are the communities in their cities, what's the infrastructure like, what spaces are available to them, and how can they react to a set of scenarios that we give them, for example, which in our main game that we play, which is called the Social Strike game. How can they react to a set of scenarios to kind of bring those different groups or spaces into contact with each other and do sort of exciting things with them? So I've spoken for quite a long time, but just to say, as well as being really good fun, one of the things we found with play of that type is really effective as a way of getting people to contribute to quite serious discussions around politics and around struggle in their cities. Because when you use that kind of play element, you reduce the sense that the kind of consequences of your contributions are profound or whatever. It's much less frightening saying these are my ideas if that's done sort of in the spirit of fun or kind of serious fun or serious about play than it is if you're in a trade union meeting or something like this. Yeah.
That's great. That's brilliant. So I mean, yeah, I'm really happy that obviously there's a lot of resonances between the approaches and the kind of like, and yeah, I should have said that it's really good to have Gaz here as a guest, just thinking about, well, what happens in other cities as well, what can be applied or thought through in Nelson. So, but yeah, let's bring it back just to kind of maybe talk a bit more about perhaps what you two as people have been sort of working here for a few months now, kind of what the experiences have been like, and maybe what you've learned through either the playing with sound or the kind of recording or the actual sort of the engagement that you've done so far. So yeah, Rob, how's it been? What's the kind of like what's been the process so far and kind of the learning there?
Yeah, it's been great fun. I mean, sort of from East Lancs originally, so it's nice to be back working in a place I kind of know and love, and it's been a really kind of exploratory process, really, working with these groups, taking school children out, going working on the kind of the allotments and, talking to people in the street, going into shops and basically just trying to be available and chatting to people about sound. And the same way we've talked about sound being brilliant, having this kind of shallowness and depth at the same time, it's just a really easy way in for talking about what's this place like, what's your experience of living here, what's it been like, what could it be. And I think just that act of asking about listening, it's really exciting seeing all the trajectories that it can kind of take you on, and it kind of wraps up all these kind of social, political, environmental kind of issues and thoughts that are bubbling away that as you say, Gaz, like maybe when you try and address head on, there might be a kind of a difficulty in teasing out in conversation, but actually through asking about listening, not even necessarily having a recorder with you, you know, it creates a space, a holding space, if you will, to for bigger things to bubble up. And that sometimes comes out in the workshops themselves. Like I was on Pendle with some school kids on Monday from Park High School, and I was asking, you know, what does Nelson sound like to you? And one kid said, it's birdsong and police sirens. And I think it sort of gets at something that it's been one of the big takeaways so far of this kind of blurring of, you know, the natural and unnatural, the countryside that we can always see kind of muddling into the town. And I think that's definitely part of the soundscape and part of people's oral experience of being here. And vice versa, being up on the hill. It's interesting to be talking to groups about the way the sound of the town, the kind of calls to prayer, the motorway kind of trains like echo out onto the fells, and the way that, you know, the surrounding landscape acts as a kind of resonator for the town. And so I think that kind of echo of presence and absence, of what the town's been in terms of its bustling past, and, you know, all these kind of plans for regeneration and reanimation have kind of very much played out in all these conversations about listening. So we've got the sound map online, which any of you can access, and I absolutely encourage all of you, if you fancy recording, I've got some recorders with me, or you can just record on your smartphone and send something in. It's meant to now just grow and grow, essentially.
Yeah, so there's been like a sort of training aspect from you in actually, well, both inviting people to listen differently to their environment that they're in, hear some of these unusual sounds that they might not hear. I mean, have there been any, I'm wondering, you mentioned sort of the different types of recording that you've done, and I know you put in some, was it hydrophones earlier in the canal, so yeah, sort of like really kind of, digging a bit deeper into the sort of sounds, and hopefully those people can then take those skills on and carry them on with you, which I know for you, Young's also maybe kind of like an ambition of the project is, as you say, to train up people. So, I mean, what do you have you seen any potential for with the engagements that you've had so far, and what have they been like? What have the conversations been like so far?
Everyone likes playing. It's sort of like asking people if they like ice cream.
Yeah.
But no one wants to
Some
make
people
the
are
ice
allergic.
cream. So I need to find people who want to make ice cream with me. And that's not an easy ask. And I realize this, which is why I'm going on this very militant recruitment drive.
Nobody leave.
And I mean, it's very deliberate that I made it look like a military recruitment poster. Because oh yes, of course. Kitchener should be there, like pointing. The thing is, the reason I thought play is essential is because it's hard to live right now. There's a lot of multiple interleaving crises, and it takes extra effort to be hopeful. And I'm asking for people who are already stretched if they can be more stretched. So I'm mindful of that fact. So I don't mind too much that it's taking a while to find the right people, because I would rather spend time with a smaller group so that these skills and thoughts would stay here rather than they leave with me. So I need more people to make ice cream. I don't like ice cream, by the way.
Okay, yeah. Not the best analogy, is it? But you're right, probably most people in here like ice cream, maybe. And Nelson has a good ice cream maker as well, doesn't it? So yeah, kind of tapped into it, yeah. I mean, I kind of think what you're bringing up, though, is I think about, and I think something where, when I framed this year around the idea of play, and sort of said, well, it is by its nature something that people think is optional or kind of additional to the basics of life. You know, play is the thing that you do, spare time, leisure time, things that kids can do, but kind of like people with real responsibilities can't. So I think this kind of trying to reframe play as an essential kind of aspect of people's lives, is something that is transformative and something that we have to make space for. It's about finding that sort of like usefulness in play, or kind of trying to without killing it. So, I mean, you're saying, guys, a lot of your things are about this kind of it's a game but towards a very specific end. And what do you think that sort of dialogue between usefulness and sort of inconsequentiality, or whatever we might call it, like, how does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think just firstly, actually, before I say that, I think like one of the interesting things about this thing of having to find the notion that like play is kind of frivolous and optional, whatever. Like, actually, I think the problem partly is an embarrassment around enjoying play. I think, like, actually, if you get to know people's lives, almost everybody is involved in some form of play, like regularly, and it's so I think there are probably more people out there that would be up for play-based things than would at first appear if they could overcome the embarrassment of enjoying play. I mean, I think with the Red Plenty Games, I mean, to be honest, we've tried to find. We started from the function in a way. In fact, we started in within a political organisation called Plan C, which the people involved in the collective subsequently left. But we were using this idea of the social strike as a kind of way of organising and a way of getting people to think about what a strike would look like if it was more than a workplace strike, if it was a strike against kind of other aspects of life as well. And it was complicated, and we were trying to find a way of making that easier to think around, and that's when we came up with making a game about it. So I think we were really trying to find a middle ground where we were definitely still trying to do the thing, but the consequences were reduced. And I would almost say if you go too far, if we, in that context, if we'd gone too far towards reducing the consequences, like people just wouldn't, it never would have taken off. You have to kind of dangle that, you are doing this for a reason, there is a purpose to this in front of people before you can encourage them to get engaged. That said, we have done kind of things like horror variations of our games that we run on Halloween, and they still have exactly the same number of people to them. So maybe that's not true. But it is you need something. You need to be working towards something, I think, to get people involved.
Yeah, like a horizon or something.
Yeah, some sort of horizon.
And your thing is so much about the transformation of as you say, like whether it's a sort of strike or something that a big change in the world that can be made through that thing, which you don't. I mean, that's like what one of the things you bring up. This element of chance.
Yeah.
Like you don't know, and that's kind of something that makes something more playful. Is the unknown outcome? And I wonder. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering if we can again go back to sort of Rob and Wyong is sort of having some time here, and I mean, I know Rob, you're carrying on with another sort of sound-based project. But how do you think it might play out in Nelson, or what do you think the potential for sort of like Nelson's what play could do to change Nelson, or think about the future of Nelson?
I think thinking specifically about the work I've been doing with people, there's a kind of, and maybe it is chance, maybe that is the word, but there's always a kind of moment when you hand somebody a microphone for the first time, put headphones on and hear the landscape that they're in magnified. We talk about it as, a magnifying glass or a microscope for hearing. And there's always a kind of, a kind of a moment of, wow, I'm hearing this landscape in primary colours for the first time. And I think there's a lot to be drawn from that about, attentiveness and attention to kind of fine grain and maybe hidden details of landscapes that we live in, in our everyday lives. And I think without getting too lofty about it, that kind of process of listening to each other, to the landscape, in a time of kind of socioeconomic crisis, ecological and climate emergency, that idea of being attentive and listening not only to each other but what's going on in the wider world, I think is kind of vital. And if that a way into that is through play in this way, then yeah, it's a very small but hopefully important thing that we can do.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think the kind of things that you've picked up on, you mentioned earlier on, but this idea that in Nelson you have, as well as kind of the actual sounds that you hear, there's a sense of absence and then resonance and echoes that happen, kind of is an interesting thing about, not just Nelson, but other places that we're talking about, whether it's Leeds or Peterborough or other places where there's space and there's kind of like, actually there kind of feels like there's potential for something else to happen there, because there's like, the narrative's not being finished or written.
No, not
and
at all.
they're the places that I feel like, your types of interventions as artists and practitioners can really make a difference there. But I know with you, Wai Young, you're very like keeping it very open and wanting to hear about what the people of Nelson might want this project to become. But if you had any thoughts about what the developments of Nelson could be if it was like a more playful place, or you managed to bring these people together, how do you think what's the change that could happen here?
I don't know.
Yeah. It's up to them.
It is up to them.
Yeah.
I think it'd be nice if we could play outside more.
Yeah.
Like the streets, there weren't as many cars, or it was safer to be just outside.
Yeah.
And there's more places for unsanctioned play. I think that would.
Yeah, so almost like a sort of survey of places where people are playing at the moment, or that could be used as more playful spots, which I think is interesting about this space today, obviously. And you've got the new pop-up space right next to a playground as well, and it's kind of like, how do those sort of like two things sort of work out? But yeah, I think I like this idea of there being, well, obviously, the whatever you call it, the Avengers for play, the kind of like the assembly group that are then able to say, well, how does that what concrete change might it make happen in a place? Because
the interesting thing I have found is when I've spoken to people at the community assembly or other places, a lot of people, especially older people, would talk about the games they played as children, and that originated from Pakistan, or like from Saudi Arabia, or like different places. And that was really nice to share, like variations of childhood play. And that I think that would be something that's like very unique to Nelson.
Okay, so like the lexicon of play, or the kind of like the sort
types
of
of games.
Exactly. The compendium, the games compendium of kind of like
Yeah.
of Nelson might look very different to a different town. Yeah, that could be a really interesting thing to bring out. And I guess again my thing with Nelson, just not places that are built around work. And their entire identity is based on a very particular type of work. Again, maybe it's an extra thing to sort of start to think about. So that's something that when you're talking about something being a particularly anti-capitalist sort of project, is it against work? Do you feel like the kind of, because I know that
against work in the Marxist sense. But, it's not against productive activity. But I think it's more these are projects against the idea of a world organised around the accumulation of profit, essentially, like as opposed to a world organised around people. Although not just people, actually. I was just thinking in terms of your like hydrophone recordings before. Like, what's really interesting about that is it's really exciting because it's basically a secret sound and it's only over there, But also, we've talked quite a lot about play in terms of transforming the human use of spaces or whatever, but actually that's not, probably don't want to transform the human use of the canal bed. That's a sort of a space in its own right with its own ecologies or whatever that probably you'd want to preserve as it is or make better in some way. But transforming the world in a way where in a way where people can play, essentially, like, and where some an ecological and sustainable world built around play rather than profit, and that necessarily means less work.
Yeah, well, I know that the pair of you are both, very interested in the 4-day week and the kind of the other, these other, which in the end, feed into the very practical stuff around a project like this, where you're asking for people to volunteer their time to take part in it. It's like, well, how do you remunerate that? And you can't get away from work and wage labour and everything else as part of it. So I think it's an interesting provocation for a place like Nelson, and certainly like the project that I'm working on about the future of work here, framing it as a game or a game that we could make with young people does create that sort of safe space where we can just sort of be a bit more imaginative about it for a while. So I'd like to sort of maybe open it up to anyone else who's got some questions, either specifically about the kind of projects that these two have been working on, or maybe some more things from you guys as well. Any thoughts or reflections? Doesn't have to be a question, so there's a bit go for it.
Yeah. Nice to see you all. Thanks a lot. Nice to see you golf and to play. I'm Paul from In-Situ. I think there's a couple of things I'm kind of interested in, just in terms of Nelson in particular and the history that we have. Just you talking about the history we have in Nelson of that socialist background and people that lived obviously in that industrial heritage or that industrial work that time, but did so much for the rights of people and found space just over the hill there to Pendle to relax and chill out. So it's kind of like there is that thing here where they've kind of embraced outside of work as much as possible for people. So there's for me there's kind of an interesting way that it fits in with that, and also just observations of working here a long time. I think when we've touched on this in the past in small ways, there is a difference where one community might think, oh, this is what we used to do, or it was safer to do it there, it was safer to play, whatever. But often you do find, particularly again here and on Avery Street and stuff, you still have that thing where, like we used to do, is just kids just playing on the street, like in amongst the cars and all that sort of stuff. Really. So where you encourage that risk with young people still exists. I'm just thinking about it a lot because in my role, I'm often sat round the table with people who are deciding about the money on these bigger schemes in like the least playful scenarios you can imagine. And it's like, how do you bring, it's a constant frustration of how you connect the way that we're doing this with people that live and work here round the table, where you've got councillors or chief exec who will just look at you like an idiot if you're trying to bring that in. So I'm often in that two worlds in terms of like this activity in there and how we just break through a little bit. And maybe your experience is a bit more that kind of like full on way of doing it would be interesting. But it's great to hear about all three approaches.
But I guess what maybe I'm picking up what you're saying there, Paul, as well as like the actual, even at a planning or a policy sort of level, that sort of bringing in that sort of and I remember talking to Emma Berman, who hopefully will bring in kind of like in the part 2 of this conversation in June, saying that's where they're getting to. It's like sort of a lot of the conversations about play at that sort of level can be had if it's like essentially like leisure or sport, because it's like, oh, then that's good for you because it's like well-being, and if it's I'm not against cycling or anything like that, but it's kind of like, oh well, we can make it if it's got like a direct benefit. But absolutely inconsequential, just sort of like, actually this is just a thing for its own sake. Feels like it's really difficult to bring into those conversations that something that has no economic value or health benefit and stuff. And actually, it's kind of like, you want to just say, well, the thing with no function, that's its function.
The aim is play.
Yeah, exactly.
And does it say something about the role of art, especially in funding structures right now, the kind of very instrumental nature of art, and what's the outcome going to be? Who are the stakeholders how are they going to benefit? And the idea of play being open-ended and experimental, how that fits within that framework.
I'd say, like, I understand the grappling of what you're doing, because I do alongside this, I also do a lot of work in the criminal justice system, and I have to use the criminologist to justify in an academic way what I'm doing, so that it is safe for the policymakers to take on these creative methodologies. They don't even, it's crouched as creative methodologies. It's not called making a game. So it's the same activity, but it's translated in a way for the serious people to take it on. Because
Paul, were you talking about so not just the kind of difficulty of getting across the importance of play in those sort of scenarios, but you're talking about actually the seeming impossibility of making that process itself a playful one. It's like injecting play into a into a funding meeting, for example.
I mean, I think it's just how the two worlds are operating. I think it's this, where there's just a bit of a repetition, which obviously fits into a capitalist model of what regenerations look like, or sort of conversations are having around what we should do with Pendle rides and stuff like that. It's trying to find, like I said, the chinks or the cracks to be able to get in and trust that doing it like this enables like another approach or something to be free. And it's like how do you enable people in those positions to feel like they can take risks, whether it's the language or the experience, whatever. Like it's still really difficult to get someone to come on a Saturday here, just to even sitting here or just hang around this park, and they're the ones that are still making the bigger decisions that are that's that's kind of what I think, just because I'm operating in that, and it's massively challenging,
Because I shouldn't use this space to talk about it in depth, but there's a particular game that I've used, not one that I was involved in inventing, although some of us adapted it a bit, but it was a game called Microscope, which is a sort of it was set up as a sort of fantasy role-playing game, but you can use it, and I have used it as almost like a game for research or whatever, or for helping very different people from very different organisational cultures find a common language. And it's a really good way. You basically end up writing a sort of a collective history of a project, including imagining how it's going to go into the future or whatever. I mean, it's a really good sort of leveling thing, basically, because it's a language that nobody has to begin with, but then it tends to be quite easy for people to kind of get to grips with it. It might be worth. I'll happily talk to you about it in more depth at some point.
It's quite a long game, though, isn't it? I know.
Yeah, it's like 3 hours or something.
Well, didn't you do it over 2 days in Biella?
Yeah. Because the players were very slow.
Because we had a
Thoughtful
facilitator.
Okay. I think we should bring Microscope out. But I mean, yeah. Is there any other thoughts or questions from?
I was interested in talking about leads and bringing it together, looking at spaces that have been used in the past week. And I was going to ask a practical example.
Well, I mean, it would be. So these are quite good examples of games that don't have a specific kind of predetermined outcome, and often they develop as they go on as well. But practically, I mean, so to use, I mentioned this Deserts in the City game to begin with, which was this exploration of neutral space. What we would normally, that was a very open-ended game, but what we've done in that game would be, we'd come up beforehand with different ways of exploring the space. Normally we would explore it separately as individuals and do some kind of collective walks around it in the day and in the night, and sometimes approaching it from different angles and then meeting up somewhere. Collect photographs, sound objects, literal found objects, and then that would then, it could produce all sorts of different things from that. Like it might produce poetry, it might produce an inquiry that we then answer ourselves or ask for others. One of the things I always do with sound objects is edit them together into a single kind of 20-minute piece or whatever, and then try to do a sort of like almost like delirious re-narration of that walk based only on the sounds. Like once I sort of separated it from what I could see at the time, and then that produces these kind of new landscapes or new spaces that just based only on sound, which can be quite fascinating, I think. And then in that group, in some ways, surrealist practice is a bit like scientific practice, not in its kind of accuracy or anything, but in the sense that it's about designing methodologies, doing some experiments using those methodologies, and then making sure everybody knows exactly what you did and how you did it so they can do it as well. So that's what we would normally do with a thing like that through our various publications that we've had over the years. Does that answer that? Yeah.
It sounds like, yeah, there's a lot of quite crossover between the way you describe that and live action role playing, which kind of like
Yeah,
seems to be something,
yeah.
the LARPing, which kind of like is like, yeah, what that would look like in a place like Nelson.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
again, I kind of feel like the scale of Nelson's interesting. It's 30,000 people, but if you have like a walk of some weirdos with sound equipment attached to them, doesn't
Yeah,
it draws a lot of attention. It can really sort of like
Right,
get
yeah.
people thinking differently about it. So like I feel like that sort of potential in Nelson in particular is kind of is quite strong, just because small things can have a big impact,
Yeah,
and again
yeah.
inconsequential things of a play can sort of like change the vibe or the atmosphere of a place quite easily. But yeah, maybe, I mean, I'm surprised you've not asked it, but I might just start like sort of end by just like, well, what do you like to do in your spare time? What's your idea of play? What do you like to do to play? If it's not too embarrassing for us. to
Wow.
talk about it.
I mean, we can do a different version. Running on the fells.
Yeah.
That's me as kid, again, running up and down the fells and switching my brain off, and sound and everything all together.
Nice. What's your favourite
I feel
game?
like I have this. I've cursed myself because like playing was work, so
So now with the job.
I don't know. Yeah, to relax, I do a shift video on the factory floor.
What's playing your
Yeah,
life?
I mean, like, quite a variety of different activities. You know, drugs, masturbation, video games. You know. I mean, I feel like I've done quite well. I feel like I devote quite a lot of my time to play in some form or other, and it can take all sorts of different forms. And also, like hanging out with children quite a lot. You know, my own and others. You know, with permission, obviously. You know, and animals. You know, dogs, etc. Just things like that really force you into a sort of play space, even if you don't know how to get there on your own. But yeah.
And what about you, Andy?
I mean, I often say music, and like
Yeah,
that's always been like, oh, I like to play, you know, and it's playing, but also that's just a bit of my life that I feel like I've somehow managed to cordon off. But actually, yeah, like you say, things start getting pulled in. You know, we live in late capitalism where, all of your life becomes your identity and your work and all that sort of thing. So yeah, maybe playing with cats is probably the closest that I sort of get to just literally like there's no
film
job
around.
until she starts paying me or whatever. But yeah, well, thank you very much. It's been a really lovely, opportunity to have. And I quite like the fact we've done it in a tent.
Yes, very nice.